They said it was just a family decision. But how would you feel if your own father stood up before Christmas dinner and said, "We voted, and you're not family anymore," while your mother pretended to cry? I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I simply placed a black folder on the table and said, "Then I guess you won't need this." When he opened it, the color drained from his face. One forged signature, $200,000, and a lifetime of secrets crashing down in silence. I'm Emily Carter, and this is how the quiet one finally ended the noise. The air smelled like cinnamon and turkey fat the moment I stepped inside the house. Tacoma in December was sharp and cold, but the Carters' living room was overheated, glowing in gold and red. Garland framed every doorway. A dozen tiny Santas lined the mantel. 3 years had passed since I'd last been here, and not one thing had changed, not even the crack in the photo frame above the fireplace. "Emily," my mother said, her smile too wide, her lipstick a shade too dark. "You made it." Her arms went around me for a quick, stiff hug that smelled of perfume and control. When she pulled back, her eyes skimmed over me like she was checking if my coat was expensive enough for the neighbors to see. "Hi, Mom," I said softly. My voice felt small in a room that never liked quiet. Dad sat at the end of the dining table, the king seat he'd claimed since I was 5. He looked older, gray at the temples, skin like creased paper, but his posture hadn't softened. His hand curled around a glass of wine, his eyes glued to the swirling red inside it. He didn't stand up. "You're late," he said as if it mattered. Grace came out of the kitchen like a spotlight had just found her. Red dress, perfect hair, that rehearsed half-laugh she'd been using since high school. "Well, look who decided to come home," she said, tugging me in by the elbow. "Smile for the picture." Dad, hold still." She turned us towards her husband's phone camera. Flash. Click. Family Perfection version 12.0. I looked up at the wall behind her. The same framed certificates, the Carter family, outstanding community service. Grace Carter, Maplewood Beauty Pageant 2005. My own picture, one from my college graduation, was half hidden behind a wreath. Fitting. The dining room looked like a magazine spread, candles, crystal glasses, the turkey glistening under warm light. Everyone was talking at once. Grace talked about Daniel's new job at the real estate firm. Mom nodded with every sentence. Dad occasionally murmured something about the market. No one asked what I'd been doing in Seattle. My fork clinked against the plate, the only sound that belonged to me. I studied my plate, feeling the same old hollow space open in my chest. Coming here had been a mistake. But then again, closure usually requires walking back into the fire, doesn't it? Grace leaned forward, chin resting on her hand. "So, she said brightly. "Still single." Her voice dripped with sugar. "Seattle must be keeping you busy." I smiled faintly. "Busy enough. She's always been a hard worker," Mom said, though her tone turned to the tablecloth. "Not me. Always independent." Dad chuckled. Too independent, maybe. The laughter was brief, awkward. My stomach tightened. I reached for the water glass, pretending it mattered. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press on my ribs. Dessert came out. Pecan pie because Dad hated pumpkin. Mom poured more wine. I could feel something gathering, a tension I'd known my whole life. It was in the way Dad's jaw flexed, in the way Mom's hand trembled when she set down her glass. Grace kept glancing toward him like she was waiting for her cue. He finally stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor cut through the chatter. He tapped his spoon against the rim of his glass, the same signal he'd used to start every family announcement. The room went still. Even the fireplace crackle seemed to hush. "I think it's time," he said, clearing his throat. "There's been enough confusion, enough tension." Mom's eyes dropped to her plate. Grace straightened, smoothing the fabric of her dress. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her. Dad looked directly at me, the kind of gaze that used to make me shrink as a child. "We talked," he said, "as a family. And we voted." He paused, letting it hang there like a verdict. "You're not family anymore." The words hit the air like something breaking. No one gasped. No one objected. Mom's fork clattered softly against her china, but she didn't speak. Grace just pressed her husband's hand, her smile frozen. I stared at them, at the candlelight flickering in their wine glasses. For a moment, I almost laughed. Of course they would make it formal. Everything in this house required ceremony. Even exile. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt an odd calm, the kind that comes when the worst thing finally happens, exactly as you always expected. I took a breath. Then I said quietly, "I suppose you won't need this anymore." Their heads turned as I reached down into my bag. The sound of the zipper was the loudest thing in the room. I pulled out the black folder. Thick, heavy, the kind that made a satisfying thud when it met the table. Grace blinked. "What's that?" I smiled faintly. "A gift. Early Christmas." Dad frowned. "Emily, this isn't the time." "Actually," I said, looking him in the eye, "it's the perfect time." The candle nearest me flickered, the light sliding across the folder's dark cover. My reflection looked steadier than I felt. Inside that folder was 6 years' worth of silence. Receipts, statements, signatures, and every tiny piece of truth they thought I'd never collect. But they didn't know that yet. They thought this was another moment where I'd lower my head and let them win. I sat back in my chair, folded my hands, and met their stares. The quiet stretched long, thin as glass. The kind that could shatter at the smallest touch. "They think I came home to apologize." I whispered inside my own head, but I didn't come home for forgiveness. Dad cleared his throat again, uncertain now. Grace's eyes darted between me and the folder. Mom's hand trembled around her napkin. No one moved to touch it. The smell of turkey and wine suddenly felt suffocating. I drew in a slow breath and looked around the room one last time. The framed awards, the shining silverware, the Christmas lights blinking on their perfect rhythm. This house had always been a stage, and tonight the play was ending. I leaned back in my chair, voice steady but quiet enough that they had to lean in to hear it. "Merry Christmas," I said, and for the first time in my life I meant it as goodbye. The first sound I ever loved was the piano, not because I played it, but because Grace did. It was the winter of 1999. Tacoma under a soft layer of snow, the kind that made the streets glow under the lamplight. I remember the smell of pine needles and lemon polish, the steady hum of our space heater working overtime. Grace was 12, her hair in perfect curls, sitting tall at the brand-new upright piano. Dad had bought her that morning. "You deserve this," he told her, hand resting proudly on her shoulder. "You make your parents proud." I sat cross-legged in the corner of the living room, my hands tucked under my legs, watching. I clapped when she played her first shaky scale, but no one turned toward me. The only reflection I saw was my own small face in the piano's glossy surface, smiling at no one. I learned early that love in our house had levels. Grace's was loud and celebrated. Mine was quiet, tolerated. Later that afternoon, Mom called from the kitchen. "Emily, don't touch your sister's piano." I hadn't even moved from the couch. "I won't," I said softly, but my words always seemed to vanish before they reached her. The days after blurred into a rhythm of music and correction. Grace practiced scales and got praised for dedication. I did chores and got told to stay busy. When Grace complained, Mom said she was tired. When I did, Mom said I was ungrateful. Then came the vase. It was a Saturday, cold and gray, the kind of day where the whole house felt small. The vase sat on the side table in the living room, blue porcelain, with tiny cracks running through it. My grandmother's last gift before she died. I was carrying folded towels past it when I heard a crash. By the time I turned, Grace was already crying. "Dad," she yelled, pointing at me. Emily bumped into it. She broke Grandma's vase. My heart jumped into my throat. Dad was there in seconds, his face darkening as he looked at the shattered pieces. Mom's footsteps followed. "What happened?" Emily knocked it over. Grace whimpered, wiping fake tears from her cheeks. I shook my head. "No, I didn't. I was in the hallway." "Don't argue," Dad snapped. "You need to be more careful. It wasn't me." His voice rose. "Enough accidents happen, but lying makes it worse." I remember the sting behind my eyes, the heat in my throat. Grace buried her face in Mom's sweater, still pretending to cry. Mom rubbed her back and said softly, "She didn't mean to, sweetheart." Then she turned to me, her expression hard. "Say you're sorry, Emily. I didn't do it. Say it." So I did. "I'm sorry." My voice barely made a sound. After they left, I crouched down to clean up. The porcelain edges cut into my palm, a tiny red line blooming along my skin. I didn't cry. Crying didn't change anything in our house. That night, lying in bed, I heard them talking through the wall. Dad's voice was tired. "Grace is a gem, Margaret. She's got a spark. Emily's fine. Just as long as she stays out of trouble." Mom's voice floated back low and calm. "She's strong. She can handle being overlooked." Overlooked. That word stuck to me like a label. The next morning, Grace played Silent Night on her piano, while I swept up crumbs from the kitchen floor. Every wrong note she hit got laughter and reassurance. Every sound I made was background noise. When people say silence is golden, they forget it's also a chain. It holds you in place until you forget how to make noise. The years went by like that. Holidays, birthdays, school events, all filtered through the same lens. Grace at the center, shining bright. Me somewhere near the edge of the frame. I used to think maybe if I tried harder, cleaned better, studied more, they'd notice. So I became the helper, the fixer, the one who said yes before being asked. I learned to survive by blending in. Christmas photos lined the hallway like a timeline of invisibility. Grace in red dresses, smiling next to Dad, trophies in her hands. Me in the background, always half-turned, always clapping for someone else. By the time I turned 12, I stopped expecting fairness. That December snow fell thick over Tacoma. The world outside looked soft, forgiving. Inside our house was loud with laughter that didn't belong to me. Grace was hosting her friends for cocoa and carols. I sat upstairs listening through the vent as they sang. When the music ended, I pressed my forehead against the window pane. My breath fogged the glass. Streetlights blurred into gold halos through the snow. If I stay quiet long enough, I whispered to the dark, maybe they'll see me. The snow kept falling. No one came upstairs. The morning I left felt too quiet for summer. Sunlight stretched across the carpet of my childhood bedroom, falling over half-packed boxes and a pile of laundry I'd never fold. The air smelled like dust and lilacs from the backyard. Mom stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her robe. "Your father doesn't like the idea of you going so far away," she said. Her voice carried that familiar mixture of worry and warning. I folded another shirt and slid it into the suitcase. "I have to, Mom. Seattle's only a few hours. I got the job. It's a real start." She avoided my eyes, pretending to straighten the bedspread. "You've always been stubborn." Then she took something from her pocket, a small gift card from a local department store, and pressed it into my hand. "Don't make him regret trusting you. Don't make us look bad." "I won't tell," I said, though my throat tightened around the promise. Her eyes softened for a second, then the mask went back on. She left without a hug, the smell of her perfume lingering behind. As I zipped up the last suitcase, Grace appeared in the doorway. She leaned on the frame arms, folded a grin that wasn't kind. "Seattle's expensive," she said. "You'll hate the traffic. And the weather." "I'll manage." She tilted her head. "Sure, but don't come running back when it doesn't work out. Not everyone's built for independence." It should have made me angry, but mostly it just felt predictable. "Goodbye, Grace." "Good luck, little sister." She smirked and disappeared down the hall. Downstairs, Dad was at the table reading the paper. He didn't look up when I entered. The smell of coffee and bacon hung in the air. I hesitated in the doorway, waiting for something, a word, a gesture, anything. Finally, he folded the newspaper and said without meeting my eyes, "Don't forget where you come from." "I won't." I said. He nodded once. "Then you can go." That was it. No hug, no handshake, not even a glance as I rolled my suitcase past him. The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that stung. At the bus station, I sat by the window, ticket clenched in my hand, the suitcase at my feet. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that promised rain but never delivered. The driver called for boarding and I climbed on, settling into a seat near the back. As the bus pulled away, I watched Tacoma fade. Our house shrinking behind rows of evergreens, the steeple of the church my parents still attended every Sunday, the same streets I'd walked to school on. Each mile felt like shedding another layer of expectation. Freedom, I thought. But even in that first hour, I could still hear my father's voice in my head. "Don't forget where you come from." When we crossed the bridge into Seattle, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, bouncing off glass buildings and water. The city felt alive, chaotic, indifferent. I stepped off the bus and inhaled air that smelled like coffee rain and possibility. My new apartment was tiny, a studio on the edge of Queen Anne, with one window overlooking a brick alley. The walls were bare, the fridge empty, but it was mine. I unpacked slowly, placing a single framed photo of me at college on the kitchen counter. It looked lonely against all that blank space. I turned on some music to fill the silence, but it didn't help. The first week blurred into interviews, HR, paperwork, grocery runs, and sleepless nights wondering if I'd made a mistake. Every sound outside felt unfamiliar. The sirens, the clatter of garbage trucks, even the hum of neighbors through thin walls. At night, I lay awake replaying the same words. Don't make us look bad. They followed me like a shadow. Work started the following Monday. Blue Leaf Analytics was a small financial firm in a downtown high-rise, all-glass walls and white desks. My boss, a woman named Rachel, was efficient but kind. She showed me my cubicle and said, "Welcome aboard, Emily. You'll be fine here." For the first time in years, I almost believed it. That night, I stood on my balcony, really just a narrow strip of concrete, and looked out over the skyline. The Space Needle glowed faintly through the fog. The city felt infinite, and I felt microscopic inside it. Still, I smiled. I thought I'd finally escaped the quiet judgment of my family. I thought distance would make me immune. The next morning, my phone buzzed while I was making coffee. A text from Mom. "Don't spend too much on rent, and remember to send something home to help Dad fix the roof." I stared at the screen, the coffee growing cold in my hand. It wasn't a question. It never was. I typed 3 words I just moved. Then I erased them. Instead, I deleted the message, slipped the phone face down on the counter, and laughed softly, one of those small, bitter laughs that doesn't reach your eyes. I hadn't even lived a full week on my own, and they were already budgeting my paycheck. Outside, a bus rumbled past, brakes screeching. I watched it disappear down the street, my reflection faint in the glass window. I whispered to no one. I haven't even started living yet, and they're already spending it for me. Then I turned off the lights, the room falling into half shadow, and let the city noise replace the silence I'd carried from home. By the spring of 2018, Seattle had started to feel like home. My apartment was still small, my furniture still mismatched, but the rhythm of the city had begun to sync with my own. Work at Blue Leaf Analytics kept me busy. I stayed late, ran reports, volunteered for extra projects. I liked being useful. Useful was safe. The first call came in March. I was making dinner, instant noodles again, when my phone buzzed with Mom's name. I hesitated, spoon halfway to my mouth. That pause, the half-second between answer and ignore, became familiar in the years that followed. "Hey, Mom," I said. Her tone was soft, practiced. "Sweetheart, how are you?" "Busy as always, I bet." "Pretty busy, yeah. What's up?" She sighed dramatically. "The roof's leaking again. Your father's been trying to get a contractor out, but you know how expensive they are." "He's exhausted, poor man. And the 13th check isn't due until next month." I already knew where this was going. How much? Oh, honey, I hate to ask. Maybe $1,200. Just to get them started. I just said I'll send it tonight. She exhaled with relief, the sound of someone getting exactly what they expected. "You're such a blessing, Emily. Really. Grace has her hands full with little Hannah, and Daniel's hours got cut at work. You're our steady one. Our steady one." I transferred the money before finishing dinner. That became the pattern. 2019. Garage door broke. Your father nearly threw out his back trying to fix it himself. 2020. Grace wants to put Hannah in a summer camp. You know she's gifted, right? 2021. Mom's credit card bill came due early, just until next month. Each time I said yes, each time my bank balance dipped a little lower, I tried to rationalize it. Family helps family. I told myself I was lucky to have a good job, that paying for things was easier than fighting. But somewhere between the 3rd and 4th transfer, it stopped feeling like kindness and started feeling like tribute. Work kept me grounded. Rachel. My manager called me her anchor. I smiled every time she said it, but deep down, it hurt because that's what I'd always been. The anchor. The one who keeps others steady while sinking slowly herself. By late 2020, I'd gotten a small raise in a corner cubicle. I treated myself to a bottle of cheap wine and a frozen pizza. That night, my phone rang again. Grace. "Hey, Em. How's the big city?" "Good," I said cautiously. "You sound cheerful." "Oh." Hannah's recital was perfect. She's a natural performer. Grace paused, her voice lowering. "But tuition for the new program is steep, and Daniel's paycheck's been weird lately. You're still single, right?" "No kids." The way she said it made my stomach twist. "Right. Then maybe you can spot me $1,200. Just until tax season. You know how it is." I looked around my apartment. 1 bedroom peeling paint, the hum of the fridge, the only sound. "Yeah," I said. "I know how it is." When the transfer cleared, she sent a text full of heart emojis. I stared at the screen for a while before turning the phone face down. By the next year, helping had become muscle memory. I worked. I sent money. I pretended it didn't sting. I started keeping track in a spreadsheet, not out of resentment, just curiosity. March 1st, 200. June 650. October 800. I never told anyone. Then came the night in December 2021. It was cold, the kind of bone-deep cold that even heaters can't fix. I came home late from the office, too tired to cook. I sat cross-legged on the couch, slurping noodles, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. Grace's latest post stopped me mid-bite. A picture of her in a designer boutique holding up a leather handbag with gold hardware. The caption read, "When your husband spoils you for no reason. Love you, babe, #blessed. The bag cost more than I paid in rent." I felt something in my chest tighten, then go very still. I whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Daniel." Or should I say, "Thank you, me." For a moment I laughed, a dry sound that didn't belong to amusement. Then I turned off my phone and sat in the dark. The sound of traffic outside filled the silence, a steady hum of lives moving forward, while mine stayed stuck in the same loop. Over the next few months, I tried to set boundaries. I stopped answering every call immediately. Sometimes I'd wait an hour, sometimes a day, but the messages piled up. "Mom, we're so proud of you, Em. Do you have a moment to help with an unexpected bill, Dad? I hate asking, but my truck's in the shop again. Grace, you're the only one who understands responsibility. You should be flattered." I started deleting the voicemails before listening all the way through. Guilt always came later, like a slow echo. By 2022, the numbers in my spreadsheet had reached 5 figures. My savings account, the one I'd hoped to use for a down payment on a small condo, sat at barely $300. Still, when Mom called that July, I answered, "Sweetheart, how are you?" "I heard there's a heat wave up there." "It's fine," I said. "Well, the air conditioning here broke and your dad's been miserable. If you could—" "Yeah," I interrupted softly. "I'll send it." She didn't even thank me before hanging up. That night, I sat in front of my laptop staring at my bank app. The screen glowed pale blue against my tired face. $213 remained. I whispered to myself. Dad would probably call that luck. At least I'm not starving. The apartment was silent except for the faint whir of the fan. I closed my eyes and leaned back, the exhaustion heavy and familiar. I thought about calling someone, Rachel maybe, or Sarah from work, but I didn't. I'd learned long ago that people like me don't complain. We endure. Outside the city, lights flickered against the clouds. Somewhere across town, someone laughed, a deep, carefree sound that cut through the night. I turned off the laptop and sat there for a while, the empty bowl of noodles beside me, my phone buzzing once with another notification I didn't bother to read. Then I whispered into the dark. Funny how they always find new ways to call it love. Rain drummed against the kitchen window, soft and steady, the kind of Seattle rain that never really stops. I was sitting at the counter with a microwaved dinner, scrolling absently through emails when my phone lit up. Grace. FaceTime. I almost didn't answer, but habit dies slowly. I swiped to accept, and her face appeared. Bright, smiling, framed perfectly, in warm living room light. Daniel leaned in beside her, grinning like they were about to announce a baby. Emily Grace said, waving. "You look tired. Working too much again." "Same as always," I said. "What's going on?" "Oh, nothing bad," she said, eyes darting toward Daniel before settling on me again. "Actually, something exciting. We're starting a business, a coffee shop downtown. Daniel found the space. It's adorable. Big windows corner location right across from the park." "That's great," I said cautiously. "It is right," Daniel chimed in. "We've been wanting to do this for years." Grace tilted her head, her voice softening into that familiar syrupy tone. "The only hiccup is the bank. They want a co-signer. It's just paperwork, Em. You know how credit works. You've always had a good score. If you put your name on the loan, it'll go through." I felt my stomach tighten. "Grace, it's nothing big. You won't have to pay a dime. It's just a formality. You trust us, right?" I hesitated. My mind flashed to the spreadsheet tucked away in my laptop. The list of transfers, the dwindling savings account. The down payment I'd been building for years. "I can't," I said finally. "I'm sorry." I'm getting ready to buy a place next spring. I can't take on anything that might affect that. The change in her face was instant. The smile froze, then cracked at the edges. Oh. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. Wow. Okay. Grace forced a laugh, the kind that sounds like it hurts. You've always been careful with money. It's smart, I guess. Grace. No, it's fine, she said quickly. We'll figure something out. I just thought family could help. Her voice had that little twist at the end, the one that turned guilt into punctuation. Grace, It's fine, she interrupted again, flashing one more brittle smile before ending the call. The screen went black. For a moment, I just sat there, the sound of rain filling the apartment. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass of the window, looking older than I remembered. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. Dad. I almost didn't answer this time either, but curiosity, or reflex. 1. Hey, Dad. His voice came through sharp and cold. What's this I hear about you refusing to help your sister? I'm not refusing. She and Daniel are trying to build something for their family, and you're sitting on savings doing nothing. You think money makes you better than them? That's not what I think. You embarrassed your mother tonight, he snapped. Grace called her crying. She hung up before I could explain. I don't need explanations. I need to understand why my daughter thinks she's too good for her own blood. Anger flickered under my ribs, quiet but hot. I've helped for years, Dad. Roof repairs, hospital bills, credit cards. I'm not made of money. Don't you dare use that tone with me, he said, voice rising. Everything we've ever done for you. Done for me. The words escaped before I could stop them. He paused. You ungrateful little... Then he took a deep breath, lowering his voice to that calm, dangerous register I remembered from childhood. It's almost Christmas, Emily. Do you really want this on your conscience? Turning your back on family right before the holidays. My chest tightened. I said nothing. His final words came out like a verdict. You've made this family look bad. I hope you're proud of yourself. The line clicked dead. I sat there staring at the phone, the rain outside growing heavier. He didn't ask why I couldn't. He only asked why I didn't obey. That was the Carter way. Duty before explanation, appearances before truth. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking slightly. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and indifferent. When I caught my reflection in the window again, my eyes were wet. I wasn't sure if it was from anger or grief. I thought about Grace's face when I said no, how quickly affection turns to accusation. About Dad's voice colder than the rain outside. Then I whispered to myself, I don't know what hurts more. The guilt they give me or the fact that I still feel it. The rest of the night moved in silence. I washed my plate, wiped down the counter, tried to read, but couldn't focus. By midnight, the city outside had gone quiet, except for the occasional hiss of tires on wet pavement. I stood by the window, arms folded, watching the lights blur through the glass. Seattle looked beautiful in the rain, distant, glowing, untouchable. My breath fogged the pain. I traced a small line through it with my fingertip and whispered, maybe justice starts with one word. The word was no. And for the first time in my life, I didn't apologize for saying it. It started on a Monday morning, gray and ordinary, the kind of morning that disappears into routine. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone chimed with a new email from my bank. The subject line read, "Thank you for updating your income and credit information." I frowned. I hadn't updated anything. At first I thought it was spam, but the email looked legitimate, logo reference number my full name. My chest tightened. I clicked the link anyway against every piece of advice I'd ever given myself about phishing scams. It took me to my real account. Everything looked normal. Same balances, same transactions, except for one new line, home equity line of credit. Updated January 8th, 2023. I didn't have a home equity line of credit. I didn't even have a house. I called the bank immediately. The hold music was soft jazz, cheerful and cruel. My pulse thudded in my throat. When a representative finally answered, her voice was bright and polite. "Hi, this is Dana with Harbor West Bank. How can I help you today?" "I got an email about an account update under my name," I said. "I never sent one. I need to know what this is." She asked for my information, the usual verification questions, last 4 digits of social date of birth, current address. My fingers trembled on the phone. After a long pause, she said, "Yes, I see the update here. The household income was adjusted and confirmed 3 days ago. It matches our records. Confirmed by who Robert Carter, she said, reading from the screen. It shows a joint authorization on a home equity line of credit for 210 Maple Avenue, Tacoma. My voice went thin. That's my parents' address. Oh, she said, her tone shifting. Are you not a co-signer on that property? No, I'm not. I never signed anything for that house. There was another pause. The clicking of her keyboard sounded far away. Ms. Carter, the system shows your signature on file. Something cold slid through me. Can you send me the document? I can email a copy of the authorization, but if you believe this is fraudulent, you'll need to file a report with our fraud department. Please, send it. When the email arrived, I opened the attachment. It was a scanned form. Application for credit extension household income, verification authorization signatures, my name, my birth date, my Seattle address, and at the bottom a perfect copy of my signature. Same slant, same loop on the E, but I hadn't touched a pen. The room seemed to tilt slightly. The hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the rain outside, it all faded into static. I closed the laptop and just sat there listening to my heartbeat. Then I stood, grabbed my coat, and left. By noon, I was walking through downtown Seattle, weaving between umbrellas, the air thick with drizzle and exhaust. I couldn't think straight. I didn't know where I was going until I found myself in front of a door with a frosted glass sign, Lydia Moore, real estate attorney. We'd met once months ago at a co-worker's dinner party. She'd mentioned she handled trust disputes and property law. I'd barely remembered her name. Until now. Inside her office was small, lined with overstuffed bookshelves and the faint smell of coffee and old paper. She looked up from her desk glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "Emily Carter," she said, surprised. "It's been a while. You look not okay. I need help," I said. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from her desk, showing her the printed document from my email. My voice shook as I explained what happened. Lydia scanned the pages slowly, her brow furrowing. "This signature," she said, tapping the bottom corner. "You're saying this isn't yours. It's not. I haven't seen this form in my life." She reached for another folder, flipping through examples. "And this Robert Carter. Your father?" "Yes," she sighed, sitting back in her chair. "Emily, what I'm looking at could be considered identity fraud. It's serious. He used your income to extend a $200,000 line of credit on their house." I stared at her. 200,000. Based on this paperwork, yes. And since the property was already leveraged, this could spiral quickly if payments aren't made. The bigger problem is that your signature legally ties you to it. If they default, it hits your credit. I felt my stomach drop. He used my name to protect his. Lydia nodded slowly. When a person's reputation is at stake, some do desperate things, especially family. I wanted to defend him, to say he must have thought it was harmless. But I couldn't find the words. The man who once lectured me about integrity had forged my name like it was an errand. He always said he'd never let this family look bad, I murmured. Now I guess he decided the best way to keep his pride was to sell mine. Lydia studied me, her voice softening. "Emily, I've seen this before. Parents using their children's credit to buy time. You can pursue charges, but it's messy, emotional. Are you ready for that?" I shook my head. Not yet. Then start documenting everything. Every email, every text, every transaction you've helped with in the past. You'll need proof. I nodded. "Do not confront him yet," she added firmly. "If you want to win, stay silent. Gather facts. Once you have everything, you won't need to shout. The truth will do that for you." Something in me shifted at those words. I'd spent my whole life thinking silence was submission. But maybe in the right hands, silence could be a weapon. When I left her office, the rain had stopped. The city looked freshly washed, glistening. I stood under the awning for a long time, the document clutched in my hand. The signature stared back at me, my name written by someone who thought he owned it. The man who taught me never to lie had written the biggest one of all. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my bag. By the time I got home, I knew what I had to do. The fear was still there, heavy in my chest, but beneath it was something colder and clearer. Resolve. I opened my laptop, created a new folder on my desktop, and named it one word. Proof. Then I began. Spring bled quietly into summer, and Seattle never really dried out. Every evening after work, I came home, kicked off my shoes, and sat in front of my laptop as the sound of drizzle tapped against the window. My living room slowly transformed into a war room. Piles of papers stacked on the floor. Sticky notes covered the wall. Each one a small wound with a price tag. Dad's medical bill. $6,400. Grace's business loan. $5,000. Mom's credit card. $8,000. Hannah's camp fee. $1,200. I opened old emails, scrolling through years of thank you, sweetheart. And just this once. Screenshots, receipts, bank transfers. I collected them all, my printer whirred late into the night, spitting out evidence like confession slips. I never realized how easily affection can be measured in decimals until I started counting it. By the end of April, my dining table was buried under organized chaos. Spreadsheets, envelopes, tabs marked in neon colors. I'd started labeling each binder by year. The apartment smelled like ink and coffee. One evening there was a knock at the door. Lydia stood there holding 2 paper cups and a tired smile. "You've been living in this cave for weeks," she said, stepping inside. "I'm almost done," I replied, gesturing toward the stacks of paper. She glanced around, impressed and concerned. "You know, most people just hire a forensic accountant. I can't afford one." "Well," she said, setting the coffees down, "lucky for you, I love organizing chaos." We spent the next few hours sitting on the floor, sorting receipts and cross-referencing statements. She slid a legal pad toward me. "We'll need to categorize these: personal transfers, property-related payments, and any direct deposits you can trace to family accounts." As we worked, rain fell harder outside, turning the city into a blur of lights. Lydia talked softly about her cases, families torn apart over wills, inheritances, land. "You'd be surprised how fast blood turns into business," she said. "I wouldn't," I murmured. By midnight, we had everything stacked in labeled folders. Lydia stretched her back and exhaled. "All right," she said, "now for the part you're not going to like." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder marked Carter Family Trust. "I got a copy of the trust document from the county office," she said. "Your grandmother was a meticulous woman. This clause here." She tapped her pen against the page. "The trustee is appointed upon the 30th birthday of the eldest grandchild." "That's you." I froze. "Me." "Yes. Which means since 2020, you've had legal control over any asset under this trust, including the house in Tacoma. Every loan, every refinancing, every line of credit tied to that property required your genuine signature." The air seemed to go still. Lydia looked up at me. "Emily, your parents have been making financial decisions they no longer had the legal right to make. The moment your father forged your name, he violated the trust." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For the first time, someone else said out loud what I'd been afraid to admit, that I wasn't crazy, that the feeling of being used wasn't paranoia, it was documentation. Lydia leaned back in her chair. "You could press charges, or you could let the system handle it quietly. Either way, you have leverage now." A strange calm settled over me. Power. When you've spent your whole life powerless, doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence. We heard a soft knock at the door. It was Aaron Price, Lydia's friend from the State Financial Bureau. He looked barely older than me, carrying a small briefcase and the kind of cautious expression people wear around family secrets. "Emily," he said, shaking my hand. "Lydia filled me in. I'm just here to help verify details if that's all right." He sat at my kitchen table, flipping through documents. His voice was steady, professional. "If you want to prove intentional fraud," he said, "you'll need to demonstrate motive. In other words, show that your father knew what he was doing and why." "Because he needed money," I said flatly. He nodded. "Then find where it went." We traced the timeline together. March 2022, a loan increase. April, large withdrawal labeled contractor expenses. May, deposit into a private account under Robert Carter's name. Lydia frowned. "Not household repairs, then." "Personal use." Aaron looked at me. "If this goes to court, that detail matters." I swallowed hard. "I'm not ready for court. I just need to know the truth." He closed the folder. "Then keep digging. Document everything. Don't confront him until you're ready." After he left, Lydia stayed a little longer. She touched my arm lightly. "You're doing the right thing." I nodded, but my throat felt tight. "He's my father," I whispered. "How do I process that?" Lydia sighed. "By remembering that right and wrong don't change just because love is involved." After she left, the apartment felt heavy with ghosts. I sat at the table, surrounded by numbers. my life reduced to transactions and dates. When the clock hit 2 in the morning, I printed one last page, a summary sheet titled Transfers to Family Members, Jipcher 2018 to 2022. The total glowed at the bottom of the page, $96, $800. I stared at it for a long time. All those years, every dollar I'd sent thinking I was holding my family together. All I'd really done was fund my own erasure. I taped the page to the wall next to the others. My handwriting underlined the number twice. I whispered, I paid tuition for their betrayal. Then I turned off the light. The rain had stopped. The city outside was quiet, washed clean, as if it didn't know that inside someone had just declared war, with paper and ink. The office hummed with the steady rhythm of keyboards and quiet tension. Blue Leaf Analytics was a world built from numbers and quiet ambition, people chasing promotions disguised as teamwork. My report sat on the corner of my desk, nearly 80 pages of analysis that had taken 3 weeks and too many late nights. That morning, the department buzzed with congratulations. I heard someone say my manager's name. Tom Adler. I looked up. He was standing by the glass conference room, shaking hands with the regional director. I watched as he smiled, accepted their praise, and said the words that made my stomach twist. It was a team effort, he told them. My team did great. Not one mention of me. When the email went out to the executive board with the report attached, I opened it and scrolled down to the bottom. Author Thomas Adler, not Emily Carter. At first, I laughed under my breath. It wasn't surprise, it was recognition. The same old pattern, wearing a suit and a badge instead of a last name. At home, they took what I built because of blood. Here, they took it because of hierarchy. I tried to work, but my hands trembled over the keyboard. Sarah appeared at my cubicle a few minutes later, balancing her coffee. You okay? She asked, lowering her voice. I forced a smile. Just another day in paradise. She leaned against the partition. You did all the data modeling on that project, right? Yeah. And he didn't credit you. I shrugged. He's the manager. That's what managers do. She gave me a look that saw right through me. You sound like someone trying to explain away a robbery. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. It's fine. It's not worth starting something. Emily, she said quietly. If you don't speak up, they'll keep doing it. Same as your dad. Her words landed like a slap. I stared at her, caught between anger and realization. This isn't the same, isn't it? She asked. Someone else takes credit for your work and you let them because it's easier to keep the peace. She was right, and I hated that she was right. After she walked away, I sat there for a long minute staring at my screen. The spreadsheet blurred. My pulse beat behind my eyes. All my life I'd been taught that being quiet was graceful, that humility was strength. But humility only works when the other person has honor. Tom Adler didn't. My father didn't. I stood. My chair rolled back just enough to make a sound loud enough to turn heads. I walked straight toward Tom's office. He looked up when I appeared at the door, surprise flickering across his face. Emily. Hey, great work on that report. The execs were impressed. I know, I said evenly. They should be. I wrote it. He blinked. Well, yes, you did most of the groundwork, but No, I interrupted. Not most. All. I stepped closer. I built the models. Ran the simulations, drafted the executive summary. You know it. And my name wasn't on it. He frowned, lowering his voice. You have to understand how corporate credit works. The manager represents the team. I'm not asking for representation. I'm asking for acknowledgement. I want my name on my work. Tom shifted in his chair, defensive but flustered. All right. I'll fix the next one. I didn't move. You'll fix this one. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. His jaw tightened. Then he sighed. Fine, Emily. I'll update the record. I'll send an addendum to the board noting your contribution. Good, I said, calm again. That's all I wanted. As I turned to leave, he said quietly, You know, people who make noise don't always last long here. I stopped, hand on the doorframe, and looked back at him. Then it's a good thing I've gotten comfortable being underestimated. Outside, the rain had stopped. I walked past rows of cubicles, my reflection following me in the glass walls. My heart was racing, but my smile was real. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the air was cold and clean. I exhaled, watching my breath disappear into the city sky. After 30 years, I'd finally remembered how to pronounce the word no. That night, I came home to another kind of silence, the heavy, expectant kind that sits in an inbox. My phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line. From Mom. I hesitated before opening it. Sweetheart, your father thinks it's time you came home for Christmas. Things have been tense, but families should heal together. Let's make it right. No apology, no mention of the loan. Just an invitation wrapped in nostalgia. I read it twice. My hands didn't shake this time. Instead, I closed my eyes, hearing Lydia's voice from months ago. Stay silent until you have all the proof. When I opened my eyes again, I looked around the apartment, the folders, the stacks of evidence, the spreadsheet still taped to the wall. Sarah called later that night. Did you get my text? She asked. Yeah, so are you going? I looked at the clock on the microwave, the blue digits glowing 9:42 p.m. The city lights flickered beyond the window, soft and inviting. Yes, I said finally. I'll go. Sarah exhaled into the phone. Why? After everything. Because they want to see me, I said quietly. And this time they'll finally listen to what she asked. I looked over at the folders stacked neatly on the table. To the only language they ever respected. What language is that paperwork? I hung up, opened the black folder, and began to organize the pages. The sound of shuffling paper was steady, almost soothing. Outside, the rain started again, soft as a heartbeat, keeping time with my resolve. The sky over Tacoma was a dull silver when I turned off the highway, the kind of color that blurs the line between afternoon and evening. Snow dusted the rooftops and the edges of lawns, softening everything except the weight in my chest. Christmas music hummed from the radio, cheerful, unbothered. I turned it down halfway through a song about coming home. People talk about going home like it's a comfort. For me, it felt like driving straight into a battlefield I knew by heart. The Carter house looked the same as always. White siding, green wreath, too many lights strung unevenly across the porch. For a moment, I sat in the car, watching the glow flicker in the reflection of my windshield. My breath fogged the glass. I counted to 3 before stepping out. Mom opened the door before I even knocked, wearing an apron dusted with flour and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're here, she said, voice a little too bright. You look thin. Doesn't anyone feed you up there in Seattle? I eat, I said, stepping inside. The warmth hit me immediately, thick with cinnamon and tension. She hugged me lightly, the scent of her perfume so familiar it hurt. You're working too hard, she murmured. City life makes people forget their families. I smiled politely. I remember plenty. Dad was in the living room, half hidden behind his newspaper. The financial section, as always. He glanced up just long enough to say, You came. That's good. Grace's voice floated from the hallway. Emily. She appeared perfectly styled in a red sweater dress, holding up her phone. You have to see Hannah's new school photo. Isn't she the cutest? She's growing fast, I said. Grace laughed, but her eyes never quite met mine. Daniel followed her, quiet as ever, hands shoved in his pockets. He gave me a small nod. Polite, tired, maybe even guilty. I couldn't tell. Dinner preparations filled the next few hours with an uneasy normalcy. Mom directed every move like a stage manager. Grace decorated the dessert table. Dad poured himself whiskey and watched a news recap about the market. Every sound felt rehearsed. When I went into the kitchen to get more napkins, I heard it. Mom's low voice, sharp as a whisper can be. She's been distant too long, she said. Your father's decided to make things clear tonight. We can't keep letting her think she runs things. Grace's answer was soft or smug. Good. She's been acting like she's the head of the family ever since that job in Seattle. I stood still, napkins in hand, heart steady but heavy. So this was the plan. I went upstairs a few minutes later to the room that hadn't changed since I left. Same palo wallpaper, same old desk. The faint smell of dust and pine from the attic above. My suitcase sat by the bed. I unzipped it and pulled out the black folder. Inside were stacks of neatly labeled sections, letters, statements, notarized forms. My hands didn't tremble as I set them out on the desk. The light from the small lamp gleamed off the plastic sleeves. Every page felt like a weapon forged from silence. I caught my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. Behind me, the walls were lined with old photographs, family vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings. One caught my eye, the 4 of us standing in front of the tree, all matching sweaters. Grace in the center, Mom and Dad flanking her and me, on the far edge, half cropped by the frame. I remembered that year vividly. I'd been 14, grounded for talking back after defending myself over something Grace had done. That picture had always reminded me that in this family even proof couldn't save me. I turned back to the desk, running a hand over the folder. They'd built their unity on pretending I didn't exist. They'd mistaken my silence for surrender, but silence is only weakness until you give it purpose. Downstairs, the house buzzed with forced cheer. Mom's voice carried up the stairs. Dinner in 10, followed by the sound of glasses clinking. I exhaled slowly, steadying my heartbeat. I repacked the folder carefully, slipping it back into the suitcase. The papers were cold to the touch, crisp against my fingers. I paused by the window, watching snow fall under the glow of the porch light. The sound was muffled, peaceful, but my thoughts weren't. They thought I was the fringe of this family. The quiet daughter, the dependable one, the background character in their perfect little tableau. That was fine, because they were about to see me in the center of everything they tried to bury. I looked back into the mirror one last time. My eyes looked calm, almost gentle, but there was a sharpness beneath it. The kind that comes from surviving long enough to stop apologizing for it. From downstairs, I heard laughter. My father's voice, commanding and sure. The clock in the hallway chimed 6. I zipped the suitcase shut, straightened my shoulders, and whispered, "Let's see if they're still proud of their reflection after tonight." Then I turned off the light. The Christmas tree downstairs flickered through the crack under the door, casting a moving pattern across the floorboards, red, green, gold, like heartbeat and warning lights combined. I stood for a moment in that glow, breathing evenly. Outside, the first snowflake melted on the window pane. Inside, every truth I'd been collecting waited quietly in the dark, ready to be unwrapped. The dining room smelled like rosemary wine and smoke from the fireplace. Candles flickered in the center of the table, catching the gold rims of the china plates Mom only used twice a year. Everyone had dressed as if a magazine were watching. Grace in emerald silk, Mom in pearls, Dad in his best blazer. Only Daniel looked uncomfortable, tugging at his collar every few minutes. The laughter was light and rehearsed, the kind used to fill silence instead of joy. I could hear the clock in the hallway between bursts of chatter. Halfway through dinner, Dad cleared his throat. The clinking stopped. He stood holding his glass of red wine, his expression grave but rehearsed. "Before we eat," he said, "there's something that needs to be said." Grace shifted in her seat, eyes on her napkin. Mom reached out to touch his arm, pretending she didn't know what was coming. Daniel's fork froze midair. Dad looked straight at me. "We've talked about this as a family. We voted." He paused, taking a slow sip of wine. "And you're not family anymore." The room went still. No one breathed. For a moment, the only sound was the faint pop from the fireplace. Then a fork slipped from someone's hand and hit the plate with a sharp, ringing clink. Grace lowered her eyes. Daniel swallowed hard. Mom pressed her fingers against her lips like she was seconds away from tears. I sat very still, the same way I used to when I was little, and knew that any movement might make things worse. But this time I wasn't scared. I met his gaze and said softly, "If that's how you feel, then I guess you won't be needing this anymore." I reached into my bag and placed the black folder in the center of the table. It landed with a solid, deliberate thud. "I brought my own Christmas gift," I said. No one moved. The air shifted. Dad frowned. "What is this supposed to be? Why don't you open it?" His hand hovered for a moment before he unlatched the folder. He flipped the first page, the ledger. Each line item neat and precise. Dad's hospital bills, Grace's business loan, Mom's credit card, debt, every dollar labeled, dated, totaled. His color drained. He turned the next page, the one that bore my grandmother's trust documents. The clause highlighted in yellow, trustee, to be designated to the eldest grandchild upon their 30th birthday. "Keep going," I said quietly. He did. And there it was, copies of the forged loan application, the falsified signature, the email chain with his name, the notarized letter from Lydia's office. He froze. His hand trembled slightly as he read. Mom's voice broke the silence first. "Robert," she whispered, "what did you do?" He didn't answer. I folded my hands in my lap. "That house you're living in," I said, "is no longer legally yours. The trust doesn't allow forged signatures. The loan was filed fraudulently under my name. The bank and the attorney already have the documents." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "You wouldn't." "I didn't do anything," I said evenly. "You did." Grace pushed back from the table so fast her chair scraped the floor. "You're insane," she said, voice rising. "You're really going to destroy your own family." "Over money, over truth," I said. "This is family." She shouted, her face red. I met her eyes. "No, Grace. Family doesn't use your name to save themselves and call it love. Daniel stayed silent, eyes flicking between us, his jaw tight. Dad finally spoke, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "You think this makes you strong? Airing dirty laundry like some vengeful child. I think it makes me free," I said, "and that's something you've never let me be." The room felt heavier with every word. The heat from the fireplace pressed against the windows. Mom covered her face, her shoulders shaking. "We just wanted to protect this family," she whispered. "From what I asked." Consequences. No one answered. I looked around the table. The people who had shaped my entire life, who had taught me how to be silent, how to swallow guilt like air. Now they looked like strangers caught under a spotlight they couldn't escape. For once, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just said, calm and steady, "I'm not here to argue. I just came to return everything that was never mine to carry." Dad's eyes flicked to the papers again, scanning them as if there might be some hidden clause that would undo all of it, but there wasn't. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to fade. Grace sank back into her chair, muttering under her breath. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. I've regretted every time I didn't. The only sound left was the fire. It crackled quietly, the warmth of it at odds with the cold that had settled in the room. Dad sank slowly into his chair, his face pale in the candlelight. His hand trembled as he set the glass down. No one touched their food. No one spoke. For years they'd demanded silence from me. Tonight I gave it back to them. Only this time it was heavy enough to be heard. The fire popped once more, echoing through the stillness. I sat back in my chair, calm, composed, and for the first time in my life, completely unafraid of the quiet. 1 week after Christmas, Tacoma made the news for all the wrong reasons. The headline on the local channel read, "Former bank executive Robert Carter under investigation for financial fraud." His picture, my father's, flashed across the screen between segments about the weather and a New Year's charity drive. The anchor's voice was calm, detached. "Sources confirm the investigation involves allegations of forged financial documents tied to a family property trust." It didn't mention me. It didn't need to. Everyone in town already knew. Within days, the ripples spread. The church removed Dad's name from the deacon board roster. Mom's friends stopped calling. The grocery store clerk who'd known them for 20 years looked away when they walked in. Even the neighbors who once waved from across the fence now closed their blinds. Grace packed her things 2 days later. She left behind a short note written in looping script, "Mom, I love you, but I need space. I can't be around Dad right now." Daniel sent me a message that same night. "I didn't know about the signature. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned it off. There was nothing left to say. Mom stopped answering her phone altogether. The last time I called, it rang until voicemail picked up. Her message still said, "Leave a message for the Carter family." I almost laughed. There wasn't much of a family left to reach. One afternoon, a notification popped up on my laptop. A new headline from a local blog, Carter Residence, under Financial Review. A photo of the house accompanied the story, the same porch where I'd once sat as a child, holding a mug of cocoa, and pretending everything inside those walls was safe. Now the shutters were closed, the driveway empty. I sat at my kitchen table in Seattle, hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone lukewarm. The screen light flickered across my face, the sound of the rain outside matching the rhythm of my breath. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel vindicated. Just lighter. Justice doesn't sound like thunder. It doesn't roar. It settles quietly after the storm, like the city after a long rain. A few days later, a text came from a number I didn't recognize. "You don't know me, but I live near your parents. You did what the rest of us never could. He always thought he was untouchable. Thank you." I read it twice. It didn't bring joy exactly, but it brought clarity. Sometimes the truth doesn't fix people. It just frees the ones they've hurt. That weekend, Sarah showed up at my door, hair damp from the drizzle, and a bright red envelope in her hand. "I come bearing actual good news," she said, stepping inside. "What kind of good news?" She handed me the envelope. Inside was a card from the HR department. "The company's launching a financial literacy program for women," Sarah explained. "They want you to lead it. You have the credibility and the story. They think you could make it real." I smiled faintly. "So they want me to turn my trauma into a workshop?" She grinned. "Pretty much." I laughed then quietly, but genuinely. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe not," she said, pulling off her coat. "You've spent your whole life cleaning up other people's messes. Now you can teach people how to avoid them. We spent the evening on the couch drinking tea, watching snow gather on the balcony railing. For once, the silence between us wasn't heavy. When she left, I went to my desk and opened the drawer that held the black folder. The same folder that had sat on my parents' dining table just a week earlier. The one that ended everything. And began something else. I ran my hand across its surface, tracing the faint scuff marks. Then I opened it one last time. Inside the pages were still neatly organized, each section labeled and dated. Proof, history, closure. I sat there for a long while, before closing it again, sliding it into the bottom drawer of my desk. I turned the key and locked it. The sound was small but final. I exhaled and leaned back, letting the quiet fill the apartment. The faint hum of the heater. The glow of the city outside, the smell of peppermint tea. It all blended into something close to peace. Not the kind of peace that erases the past, but the kind that accepts it, I whispered to myself. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning of the part I get to write. And for the first time I believed it. Christmas came quietly that year. 1 year later, the world outside my apartment window glowed in soft blues and golds. Snow drifted over Lake Union, dissolving before it touched the water. Seattle looked peaceful, suspended between the stillness of winter and the hum of life that never really stops. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the smell filling the room. The radio played an old Christmas song from the 60s, the kind my mother used to hum while decorating the tree. I let it play. It didn't hurt anymore. It just sounded like memory. The apartment was warm, filled with little reminders of the life I'd built on my own. A stack of books near the window seat, a small fern that somehow survived despite my neglect, and a single photo on the wall. It wasn't of family. It was of the city skyline reflected in the lake. I walked to the window and watched a boat glide slowly across the waterlights, blinking red and green. Somewhere below, a child laughed. When the mail arrived, I pulled on a sweater and went to check the box by the door. Among the usual bills and flyers was one small envelope. White, slightly smudged, addressed in uneven handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Hannah. I brought it inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper decorated with a crayon star. Dear Aunt Emily. Are you okay? I miss you. Mom doesn't like to talk about things, but I remember how you used to make hot cocoa for me and let me stir it, even though I made a mess. I hope you have a tree this year. Love, Hannah. I read it twice, then pressed the paper flat against the table, my throat tightening. For all the noise and chaos that family had caused, this small letter felt like something pure breaking through the wreckage. I reached for a pen and a blank card from the drawer. My handwriting was steadier than I expected. Dear Hannah, I'm okay, sweetheart. And you will be too, as long as you remember this. Love never comes with conditions. It isn't earned by obedience or lost through mistakes. It just is. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'm proud of you always. Love, Aunt Emily. I slipped the note into an envelope and sealed it carefully, then set it aside by the window to mail in the morning. Outside, the snow had started falling again, soft and slow, the flakes glowing under the streetlights. I thought of Dad then, not the man who'd forged my name, but the man who once taught me to ride a bike on that same frozen Tacoma street, running alongside me until I didn't need him to hold the seat anymore. I hoped he'd learned something too. Maybe loss teaches people differently than love ever could. The house in Tacoma had been sold months ago. The trust fund had been transferred to my management, and the bank's investigation had closed. My parents lived quietly now, in a small rental outside town. I hadn't spoken to them since the spring, though a single Christmas card arrived last week. It was unsigned except for 2 words written in my mother's neat handwriting. We're still here. I didn't reply. Some silences are meant to stay intact. The heater clicked on, breaking the quiet. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through my hands. For the first time in my adult life, I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to call, apologize, or explain. I had my own peace built slowly and quietly out of the wreckage of everything they thought they'd taken from me. Outside, the city glowed, apartment windows flickering like constellations, the faint sound of carolers drifting through the cold air. Across the street, my neighbors strung the last of their Christmas lights. The reflection shimmered through my window, tiny bursts of color across the glass. I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I'd finally stopped needing it to be. The radio host's voice cut in between songs. "Wherever you're spending the holidays tonight, I hope you're warm, safe, and surrounded by the kind of love that doesn't hurt," I whispered almost to myself. That's exactly where I am. I leaned back in my chair, watching the snow gather on the balcony rail. The light from the apartment across the hall flickered once, then steadied, casting long streaks across the floor. This city had become my home in ways Tacoma never was. Here, no one expected me to be the quiet daughter, the fixer, the apology. I was just Emily Carter. No one's backup plan, no one's safety net. Dad once told me that I wasn't family anymore. He was right. I'd left that family to finally find myself. The clock on the wall struck 8. I turned off the radio, leaving only the soft hum of wind outside. For a moment, I watched the lights of the nearby restaurant blink in the reflection on my window. Red, gold, blue, steady and alive. The world kept moving, and for once I wasn't chasing to catch up. If you've ever been treated like an afterthought in your own home, remember this: justice doesn't need noise. It doesn't need revenge. It just needs truth, and the courage to speak it even if your voice shakes. I stood, turned off the lamp, and looked out over the water one last time before the snow blurred the view completely. Peace doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from finally choosing yourself. And that was enough.